Welcome back to the workshop. Today I've got myself a bunch of steel and I'm going to be doing some corrosion tests. So I often wonder which is the best steel to avoid corrosion. We all know about stainless steels, but just because they stain less it doesn't mean they don't stain at all. So I've got my favourite high carbon steel, which is 52-100. We've got good old 012 steel. I'm using Niolox as well, which is a sort of hybrid between a stainless and a high carbon steel. And we've also got 14C28N, which is Sandvik's top of the range stainless steel. So I'm going to be putting them into a variety of different corrosive liquids or purees. So we're going to use water. And as I make kitchen knives, I want to put this in almost a real world test. So we're going to use a tomato puree. We're going to use an onion puree, and this stuff really stinks. And we're going to use ferric chloride, and this is watered down, diluted 50-50 with water and the ferric chloride. So let's prepare some steel and start making sparks. Okay, so it's day two, and just to recap, these little strips of steel have been sitting in these cups overnight. We've got 4 different steels. We've got an 012 steel, we've got Niolox, we've got 14C28N, and we've got a 52-100. They've all been sitting overnight. Previously, these have all been heat treated to manufacturer's specs. They've been hit with a surface conditioning belt to around about 400 grit. So they're pretty much as you'd see in a regular knife. So let's have a look. Let's start with the 01, and this is the water. And look in there, I mean, there's a bit of discoloration, and the water is gone a very sort of brown colour, but not as much as I'd expect. And if we look at where else have we got? We've got the 52-100 in the water. Again, you can see a sort of rusty colour there, not as bad as I'd expect. Now, I think what has happened is these have been submerged in their liquids, so they haven't really had time to oxidize. They haven't been exposed to any oxygen. And I mean, you can see that, and let's have a look. This is the Niolox, which has been in the ferric chloride. It's obviously very dark because it's been in ferric, but where the surface of the liquid hits the steel, that seems to be where most of the corrosion is. So that's due to the oxygen. It's mixing with oxygen, so it's oxidizing and causing the rust. And you can see it here, even with the stainless in the water. You can see there that line, and I think that means that is where it's hit the oxygen. So if we have a look here, even with the stainless, the 14C28N, just where the steel hits the surface of the water, we're seeing a lot more corrosion. And that seems to be right across the board here. So we've got the Niolox in the tomato, and that's happened the same here. So right where the surface line is, we're seeing more corrosion. So what I think I'm going to do is take each of these out and just rest them on top of each cup, just like this, overnight, so they can be exposed to air and oxygen, and we shall see again tomorrow the effect of that oxidization on each of the steels. Okay, so this is day 3 of testing. So all of these steels have had 24 hours submerged in the liquids. They've now had 24 hours just exposed to the air and oxygen. And we can really start to see some patterning here. So from rust to some pitting to some staining to some just sort of general darkness. And the way I've laid these steels out is for carbon content. So the steel this side, which is the 52-100, has the highest carbon content with around about 1% carbon. We've then got the 01 tool steel with around about 0.9%. We've then got the Niolox with around about 0.8% carbon, and then the what they call a true stainless, which is the 14C28N with about 0.6% carbon. So let's have a closer look at what we can see here. So if we start with the steels that have been in the water, which is across the bottom here, 52-100, as you can see, it's got a very sort of dark rusty colour to it. The 01 tool steel, again very dark, maybe not as thick, and this seems to have a thicker layer, maybe not such a thicker layer on the 01. The Niolox, very, very thin layer, and the 14C28N, that's very, very little on there. In fact, that would probably rub off with a paper towel. Then going on to the tomato, looking at these, there doesn't seem to be much damage to any. The 52-100 seems to be a lot darker, so there's actually a darker stain on there. But I think that stain is probably there to stay. The 01, again, it's stained, but more so around where the actual surface of the liquid was. So I think most of the corrosion happened there in that first 24 hours. The Niolox. Now this one seems to have some sort of pitting on there. The stain seems to have clumped together, and there's not too much of a marking on there. Which then takes us to the stainless, which is the 14C28N. We're starting to see a little bit of rust happening there, and again, I think if I were to take a cloth on there or a paper towel, that may come off completely. Now the onion, I was expecting similar results to the tomato, maybe a bit stronger. So the 52-100, again, there's some darkness on there, not really rust, but more of a marking and more of a darkness. The 01, again, the same, possibly sort of clumped together. If you can see in the light there, they've sort of clumped together. But again, I think a lot of that would come off with a paper towel. Now the Niolox, this is quite interesting. So this one has actually gone more rusty. It's got more of a rusty colour to it, almost like the others did with the water. And then we've got the stainless. Really not much there at all, and again I think that would just come off with a paper towel. Which then takes us on to the ferric chloride. So the 52-100, that one, it's almost crystallized on the steel there. We've almost got crystals forming. It's definitely deformed and changed shape slightly, so that's really bitten into this steel. The 01, very similar. We seem to have much bigger crystals on there that formed. Again, it's changed almost the structure of the steel. The Niolox, very similar to the 01 actually. There was crystals appearing on the top, and it's definitely sort of bitten into that steel. That's not coming off with a paper towel. And then we've got the stainless, which is the 14C28N. And again, that really has bitten into there, and we can start to see those sort of oxidization colours, those sort of reds and yellows appearing slightly on there. And this was the stainless 14C28N. So we've talked about carbon content, and as I say, these have the highest carbon content, and we go in that order. But I think the chromium content has a big part to play in these as well. So this test may be quite crude, but it's clear to see that the steels with the higher carbon content have clearly corroded a lot more than those without, particularly with regards to rust, which is the red oxidization we see here. The steels with the higher chromium content, such as the Niolox and the 14C28N, they've outperformed the higher carbon steels with regards to stain resistance, as we imagined they would do. But the ferric chloride really has eaten into all of the steels, I'd say probably quite equally. The 01 has surprised me quite a bit. It's really held up. It's held its own alongside the 52-100. The Niolox has been slightly better, and as I say, the 14C28N really is the star of the show. So thank you for watching. Hopefully you found some value in this. Please give me a subscribe and a thumbs up, as it all helps. You can also check out my podcast at knifetalk.net, which is a weekly show which I do with 2 other knife makers. And check out my work at chopknives.com. Thank you very much.